Let's do the meme, the inflation meme. You guys know about vegetable inflation? Google vegetable inflation to find out more. Probably don't actually. That might not be advisable. Regardless, this is the article that I showed earlier. Thank you, Axios. Veggieflation. Can we not? Yeah, the price of vegetables increased. So warning for grocery prices. Change in wholesale fresh vegetable prices. This is a 1 month change, by the way. This is a 1 month change. In the past month, the price of vegetables increased 39%, which is not good. Now, you can see from this graph, I'm almost certain they've done this as a framing device. This isn't the only time that the price of vegetables has, like, spiked in this kind of way. But you will notice that the other times that this happened were during the pandemic and during the economic turmoil that occurred in the very sloppily handled recovery of the pandemic, and then in the hot labor summer when a lot of unions were going on strike, right? That's these spikes. And then this one I actually don't know what it is. And then this one is the tariffs. I guess I'll go through the article here, but the long and the short of what I understand is that the Trump tariffs, the Trump tariffs kind of went into effect. They've been steadily going into effect over time. They are disastrous in their economic implications, but because of how flippant they've been, a lot of businesses have actually been not offloading the costs of those tariffs yet onto consumers. They've been holding out on offloading them as long as they can for two reasons. Number one, they're counting on them being flippant to say, like, well, eventually these tariffs will go away, and we can say, don't worry about it, it was nothing. And that way they get to keep their good relationship with the administration that is, like, very pro-business. Otherwise, they still get to do, like, some quid pro quo shit between an extremely corrupt pro-business government. And they don't have to deal with the economic fallout of increasing prices and losing a lot of customers. And then secondly, if the tariffs do stay in effect, they get to sort of usher people in with prices that haven't increased yet. Then when they have, like, they've kind of run out their margins and they're like, okay, now we actually got to offload these costs onto the consumer, then they've got a bunch of new customers who are going to keep shopping there regardless. And now the consumers just have to eat the prices, the higher prices, instead of, like, some sort of demographic consumer shakeup, you know? Because if you do this in a way where, like, if they don't take that approach, right? If they raise their prices right away, then consumers would be much more wary of shopping at a store that that will flip its prices so readily, where like prices will go up and down, so, like, in such a volatile manner, it might actually lose, like, some grocers or stores in general, businesses might lose some customers in the long run because of, like, inconsistent pricing. Reminds me of the Vosh debate where the one person said, I'll just get a loan for a factory. I remember that debate. Definitely a real thing that anybody can do anymore. But yeah, let's take a look at the actual article itself. It's Axios, so it's, like, a step above most other news outlets, which is kind of crazy. Because Axios is a center-right, like, Australian publication. Monopolies are real and they're happening right now. Yeah, I explained in the video where I kind of crashed out and had a, like, schizo rant about the death of liberalism, which I stand by every word that I said in that video, thank you. That even the things that are bad for business now are good for monopolization in the long run. Even if it's bad for business in the short term, if it sows instability, it enables consolidation, because the smaller businesses will have no choice but to sell out or go under otherwise, and the big businesses get to consume them and consolidate basically into a monopoly or an oligopoly or basically we're starting to see some of the corporate magnates from, like, a cyberpunk-esque dystopia, just without the at least in the first world, without the overt violence of people with guns, you know? I think liberals just don't understand the concept of power. They don't. I mean, a lot of people don't. You know? The U.S. economy has a vegetable problem, and it's not just broccoli refusal either. Oh yeah, the kids don't want to eat their broccoli. They put in some melted cheese. It's real good. Wholesale prices for fresh veggies soared by a record amount last month. Yeah, this is 1 month. Almost 40% increase in the price of fresh vegetables, and that hurts me, motherfucker. My diet consists almost exclusively of like fresh vegetables and fruits. Like that is my source of fruits and vegetables. It's only the fresh produce. You know? If you don't want to eat broccoli, skill issue. Honestly, true. Eat your broccoli, eat your spinach. Spinach is good for you. Foreshadowing a possible spike at the grocery store soon. Why it matters. I can't fucking speak. If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that the real statistics on inflation don't matter when consumers see the prices of tangible everyday goods, food, gasoline, etc., rising sharply. This is something that I wish got highlighted more. That I did read in Kahal Moran's Why We're Getting Poorer, is that in inflation, the PPI and the CPI, these are the two statistics that combine to make the inflation number that you see, are a highly abstract, almost arbitrary measure that's like a ultimate average of all price changes, right? Like, you combine everything that has a price tag of some standard on it, right? Like, the market rate for things is actually pretty standard. The inflation is calculated basically by adding up all of the percentages of price changes on anything, and then taking all of those percentages and dividing them by the number of things that have had a price change. And that's the inflation number. But what that means is that you could get things that are wildly out of step with the inflation number. For example, inflation from last year to this year, I think is something like 3-ish%. We're yet to get yearly numbers, I think. But you look at these changes in the prices of vegetables, this is way the fuck more than inflation, right? But it's very easy for this to get swallowed in a much larger sea of goods, especially if they're weighted by monetary value, so that inflation appears much lower than the actual impact of it, because the prices for consumer goods and things that people of lower incomes would be relying on, those prices are increasing, especially relative to people's wages, much quicker than very expensive things that the wealthy would be engaging in more, and things that, like, frankly, if you have that kind of money, you don't have as much trouble buying. Does that make sense? That's what this is expressing. So, for example, if you had if you have a economic, like, magnifying glass, you look at two things, right? Let's say the price of bread. Let's say the price of bread increases 10% in 1 month. Also a pretty big price increase, right? But the price of, what's something that, like, really wealthy people, like, almost exclusively wealthy people engage in? Let's say, like, what's like a category, like a class of goods that almost exclusively is dealt in with respect to, like, really wealthy people. Boats. There we go. You know, maybe the fishermen have something to say about that too, but, like, luxury boats. Let's say the price of luxury boats, because of, like, I don't know, some increased availability of material, decreases 10%. If you put those two together, this is kind of the way that inflation is calculated. You put those two together and assume that there's relatively the same amount of money being spent on both of those. You add that 10% and that negative 10%, and you get 0. And then you divide it by 2 because there's two goods that you just looked at, and you get an inflation number of 0. But that hides the reality, right? If you look at, like, bread increasing, the price of bread increasing by 10%, that is not 0% inflation, right? The inflation number almost doesn't mean anything, right? It's kind of useful to assess a long-term trend, but when you see yearly inflation, that has so little bearing on the like ground rules of economic activity, and it's kind of hard to extrapolate much from it. Aside from like things are getting more expensive, because as a general rule of thumb, the fortunes of people who are already very wealthy tends to grow at a rate faster than inflation, right? Wealth is being consolidated upwards. And wages don't grow that fast, right? But prices increasing at a steady rate just means that the gap is widening still, right? So inflation is bad. Deflation could be good sometimes under very specific circumstances, but ultimately it's like, what I'm trying to say is capitalism fucking sucks because money is complicated and arbitrary, and it is like, it's just an excuse to be like, oh yeah, you see this this little number on the screen here is green, but your number is red, so you don't get to eat this month. And that's what this is. And Trump made it like a million times worse because he was like, yeah, you know, all of these like trade relationships that the United States spent decades building, we don't need those anymore. Sorry, fuck you, bye. By the way, your food is now like way the fuck more expensive. If I eat anything with water, I can't taste it. That is really strange. I don't know why that happens. While big box retailers have pledged to hold the line on groceries in the face of tariff pressure, not everyone can or will do that as trade war costs mount. Yeah, okay, so this is just what I was saying earlier. Grocery stores have sort of held off on increasing consumer prices, hoping that the tariffs will go away, but they can only do that for so long. So here's the producer price index for July rose at the fastest clip in 3 years, far more than economists expected. This was the PPI. That's what we call coping. Basically, now it's not unheard of for there to be a temporary spike in price increases. This has been known to work before. There have been instances in the past where like a temporary 6-month spike in prices for certain things occurs. And like, as a result, grocery stores and other businesses can actually just kind of eat those costs temporarily to keep business flowing at a steady rate. Then when the spike disappears, they don't have to change their prices. And they're like, all right, great, it was fine. And they get to keep their customers. Basically, the machine gets to keep churning. It's like, it's one of the very few ways in which having a profit margin does build at least a marginal amount of resilience into economics, right? Think I've heard of that stretch to use against lower businesses. Yeah, and I talked about that earlier. A lot of times businesses will also do that as a sort of war of attrition type tactic, where they know that smaller businesses that don't have as comfortable profit margins or whatever, don't have the kind of resources to marshal to make that work, will die. And that means that a larger business will be like, hey, we'll give you some capital if you agree to be basically like under our business umbrella, right? They get to consume them into their business empire. So that's another reason that businesses do that. They don't say the number here, but oh, I guess they link it. Wholesale prices. Oh, fuck you, Axios. The producer price index rose 0.9% in the month of July, which is a massive red flag, by the way. A normal rate of inflation is somewhere from 1 to 3% yearly. This is almost 1% in a single month. And that's just at the sort of beginning of things, where some of the permanence of the tariffs is like starting to set in, where Trump has kind of stopped waffling. The dust has settled a little bit. They're not kicking as much sand on the field anymore, right? This is like foreshadowing is a narrative device where you get it. As opposed to the better known consumer price index, which measures what we pay at stores to buy completed things, PPI measures the cost of those things as they make their way through the production cycle. Yeah, so the PPI is the measure of pricing that you probably won't see on the shelf, because that is consumer facing. This is the producer facing sort of measurement for prices. And again, these two are also like their own aggregates, right? These two numbers get combined and averaged to make inflation as we know it. But then each one of these is half of that, which if you divide like 18 squadrillion products or items or things that have a price tag on them for either producers or consumers in half, you still get like 9 squadrillion things that producers need to worry about the price of in the aggregate. You know? But the fact that there is an emerging trend that like producer prices are starting to get expensive very quickly is like really bad. Yeah, okay, if the CPI measures what you're paying right now, PPI is a strong indication of how those prices may move in the future. Nice typo. Since a higher cost to make things usually means a higher cost to buy them too. Yeah, in fact, this has an exponential relationship to the cost of purchasing things because, like I said, profit margins, the cost of buying something is always over and above, like expensive over and above the cost of producing said things and actually distributing them. You know, you always pay more than something is worth for the most part. In a like exchange value sense. Now there are exceptions to this. For example, highly subsidized goods, such as beef and red meats at the grocery store. In America, uniquely, this is a thing. At the grocery store, if you're buying beef, you are paying way less than what it actually costs to produce that beef. Right? In that case, the government is paying for it. Yes, that's what subsidies are. But if it's something that's less heavily subsidized, then you are almost always paying more than the combined amount of production costs that went into producing that single unit of that thing. You know, for example, the Nintendo Switch. Many people have made a stink over the price tag of $450, which is not a very high price tag for a home console. Get over yourself. But $450 is more than what it costs to produce and distribute one single Nintendo Switch 2. You know, because that's how business works. That's how business in a capitalist mode of production works. Things are distributed through the accounting of money for the sake of accruing a profit for the company. And then for the sake of reinvesting that profit into, I don't know, some shit. In America, it would be stock buybacks. Anywhere else, it might be like, I don't know, investing in more long-term partnerships with other companies to expand operations or something. A 38.9% increase in prices for fresh and dry vegetables from June to July. Oh, so this wasn't even July to August. Was the major driver of a higher index for final demand goods. Things that are done and ready to be sold to a consumer as opposed to things that go into a later production process. That was the biggest month-on-month increase for fresh vegetables since March 2022. Per Bureau of Labor Statistics data, it's also the largest monthly increase ever recorded in a summer month in figures that go back to 1947. We are so fucking cooked, dude. That's something I didn't even think of this because I'm not a farmer. Shout outs to all of my farm worker comrades out there. Yeah, this March, you may notice March, that's out of season for vegetables. So it's more expensive when vegetables are out of season to actually condition them and like harvest and export them and distribute them to stores, right? The larger bulk you're distributing things in, the less it costs. And the more ideal conditions you're doing it in, the less it costs because there's less like kid gloves that you have to apply to it, basically. So, wow. We're fucking cooked. So right all the time, we're like, Gojo? You mean Jojo? Part 2? Your next line is? Because yes. Because of the import situation. Oh, what they're saying. Because of the import situation, because we get most of that produce across the border and their imports, the tariffs have a lot to do with that. Phil Garfakis, the president and CEO of IFMA, the Food Away from Home Association, tells Axios. This is one of those associations of the producers that Adam Smith talks about, as opposed to the associations of the workmen. People talk about unions a lot, particularly the right wing talks about unions to throw shade on them. The left wing also talks about unions both to compliment them and to throw shade on them because, you know, we are communists here. We don't believe in capitalist trade unions. Thank you. This is basically like a trade union, but for the for the owners, the like the CEOs and the executives and stuff. This is an association of their industries, as opposed to an association of the workers, like a union is. There's no guarantee that 1 month of rising prices will inevitably pass through, but it's another risk factor that suggests the long-awaited consumer tariff pain could be coming sooner than later. Yeah, okay, here's the thing, right? To speak to that. Even if this doesn't persist, like, even if this ends up being another spike and, like, the next month prices go down again, if there's any sort of upward trajectory, if another spike like this happens, then eventually you're going to see the consumer prices increase at an increasing rate. Inflation is the rate at which prices increase. You're going to see that increase if we get any more of this, right? It doesn't even have to be this big, right? Also, because this is the PPI, this is not reflected in the price tags. Like Axios said, you may notice at no point in this did consumer prices actually decrease. Consumer prices very, very rarely, if ever, decrease. Why would companies do that? Why would they make less of a profit voluntarily? There's nothing in it for them, you know? So the increase, this drastic ass increase, will probably be reflected in your grocery bill. But if the spike ends and there's a drop off, this, like a dip like this, probably won't be reflected in your grocery bill. So excited to see the median voters' reaction when it happens. I feel like they're just going to be like, damn, Trump sure did make those groceries cheaper. Anyways, I blame immigrants for this. The median voter is cooked. Unless, of course, there is another present animating force that sort of galvanizes them to the left, right? This information alone is not enough to radicalize somebody to the left. With PPI up much more than CPI in July, tariff costs look to be working their way through the value chain. Comerica Bank chief economist Bill Adams said in a note on the PPI report. This is one useful function that banks actually serve. Fucking crucify me for saying this, right? Banks actually do have a lot of economists working for them, and they do analyze a lot of data, right? When they're not, like, destroying society by deciding we need to make more workers die this year, and like, we need to raise interest rates so that people can't have money anymore and they die, or we need to lower interest rates so more people go into crippling debt. When they're not doing that, they're doing shit like this, which is like crunching numbers and analyzing data, which is a useful function. It's just, you know, right now this happens to be a function occupied by banks, private banks and shit. Ultimately, this should be some shit that, like, the government is in-housing. You know, like with the Bureau of Labor Statistics and stuff like that, or even the Federal Reserve. Oh, it was not Varoufakis, it was Kafarakis. Notes that when the harvest cycle kicks in, there may not be enough farm workers to pick all the domestic produce on top of the weight of tariffs on imported products. Damn, I wonder who's at fault for a shortage of migrant farm workers that can fucking pick the vegetables and ship them over to the grocery store and then drive them to the grocery store and then, like, work at the grocery store. I wonder which individuals in government, in this administration, which kind of department, which enforcement agencies are responsible for fucking a massive shortage of workers and enormous tariffs that are making all the food more expensive. That's crazy. So in another, call it 4 months, getting into October, right, quarterly. Quarterly would be 3 months, but I guess 4 months would be start seeing the effects. The quality and the capacity of what we're able to bring in is going to be a real problem. Prices will soar to keep demand in check, he said. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Eggs, coffee, ground beef, and chicken. Americans love their hamburgers, dude. Anyways, Trump take egg, Trumpflation, Trump's America. Literally, this is Trump's America. Like, everything, every negative effect that either has already happened or is being potentially forecasted by this article has just unfolded since the beginning of this Trump administration because of the tariffs. Like that, this is all on Trump. Feels like reality is like we trust Dio with the government. Why is everything failing? Yeah. Kono Dio da! Damn. Yeah, they really elected Dio into government with none of the riz or charm. Well... Yeah, America's about to look like a fucking post-Soviet state from the Soviet bloc. If that's a segment, cut it there, future me. Wait, no, actually don't. Too late. Thanks for watching, and support the channel if you would be so kind.